Hello, my name is Kevin Dean, and I'm the Vice President of Front-End Innovation and Connected Health at Philips Medisize. Philips Medisize is a global organization. It's been around since about 1964, and it's an innovator and contract design and manufacturing organization focusing almost exclusively on medical devices and specifically drug delivery device technology. Um, we have innovation centers in the US, in Europe, in China, and India, and manufacturing centers where we develop our products globally. We're part of a larger organization called Molex. Molex, as well, is a global organization that services the electronics, electrical, and connectivity sectors across many different industries. My name, as I said, is Kevin Dean. I'm speaking to you from Cambridge in the United Kingdom, where I've been based for the last 25 years. It is a center of innovation and technology in many areas, but particularly around drug delivery technology, which has been the focus of my career over the last 20 or so years. I've been doing a lot of work around advanced drug delivery technologies, and particularly looking at how we can use connectivity and connected technologies joined up with drug delivery in order to provide better solutions for patients in the industry. And that's really the topic of my discussion today, is talking about how we can add connectivity to drug delivery and how we gain value from that from all the stakeholders. So with that, I'd like to jump into my presentation. Right. Often when I talk about this subject, I like to step back a little bit and think about healthcare and healthcare provision more broadly. And I start out by saying a pretty basic statement. Healthcare is increasingly digital. This is a diagram that I picked up off of the internet a few years ago to help illustrate this point. What you can see is, first of all, that hospitals are at the center. As much as we like to talk about patient-centric healthcare, the truth is today that we have professional centers, whether those are hospitals or clinics, that really form the central part of healthcare provision across the world. And that's been something that's been moving in place for the last 50 to 70 years. The difference that is evolving at the moment is the equipment that is used within that environment is now producing and storing your health information digitally. So that can be everything from imaging systems to diagnostic tests like blood analyzers, to newer wearable-based technology that we're using, sometimes moving out of a hospital environment and coming back in. And also more and more consumer-based devices that are starting to get involved in healthcare provision. And that could be anything from your smartphone to PC or laptop-based applications. The interesting thing when we look at this diagram, however, is that there's one central part of healthcare provision that's missing, and that's medicine. All right. Interestingly enough, we don't have very much data about how people are taking their medication, particularly once they get out of a hospital or clinical environment. And if you think about that, that's a bit crazy. Right? You think about a normal way that you or one of your family members interacts within a healthcare environment. You're feeling unwell, something's not right. You go and you see a doctor. What's the doctor going to do? The doctor is going to take a diagnosis of your condition, and they're going to determine some sort of a therapeutic intervention. Quite often, that therapeutic intervention is in whole or in part medication. So you're given some sort of a prescription, or you're given medication, and you go away from the doctor. And at that point in time, we really lose sight of what you're doing as related to your condition. So we don't understand how you're taking your medication, when you're taking your medication, whether you're doing that in the right way, and whether you're even taking your medication at all. You go for a follow-up visit quite often and you see your doctor or another doctor. they are going through and diagnosing your case again and trying to determine the effectiveness of the intervention that they've given you without any knowledge again about how you're taking the medication. So it's a bit crazy, the system at the moment, because medication forms such a fundamental element of healthcare provision. And yet it's completely off the radar when we think about this evolving digital environment. And what's the impact of that? Well, the difficulty is all stakeholders lose out to this view of non-adherence, of people not taking their medication. The general estimates, when we look around globally, is that 50% of medication is not taken as prescribed, right? You'll see reports that show slightly bigger numbers or slightly less, smaller numbers, but 50% is a good number to use. And this is data that was brought up in 2015, so it's now about 5 years old. The situation hasn't changed significantly. But what's the impact of that lack of adherence? Well, when we look at the same data in the US, the estimate is that that led to $290 billion of avoidable costs in healthcare. That $290 billion represents 13% of overall US healthcare spend. And that 13%, that $290 billion, is actually 2.3% of overall US GDP. So it's a big number, all due to individually the behaviors that we have. And we see this behavioral pattern repeat itself regardless of the disease area or the therapy area that we're looking at. Here's an example of 4 or 5 different disease areas, and we see, as I said, the same basic pattern, although there's slight discrepancies. Generally, we have significant problems in the beginning when we're talking about persistence. A very big drop-off with people who really never take up the medication in the way that it's prescribed. This is about a 2-year plot, and so what we see is after that initial 3-month period, things level off a little bit, but there's a steady decline, and that steady decline all relates to habits. How do we habitually change our behavior in order to do the things that are right for us? And those are very difficult behavioral patterns to change or modify. The difficulty is today, we don't have any information to understand how do we extrapolate this high-level data to individual behavior. As I said, all stakeholders lose out. So clearly, individual patients lose out from not taking their medication. The medical prescriber, the practitioner, loses out because more of their time is taken trying to work with patients who aren't taking their medication correctly. More money is paid out by payers. But in addition, pharmaceutical companies lose out. So this is some data brought from 2011, which showed in the US, over $500 billion were prescribed in medication. So available for pharmaceutical companies to sell their medication, right? This was prescribed information. But interestingly, $200 billion of prescribed medication was never fulfilled. And so that money never came back to the pharmaceutical industry, even though it had been prescribed. That is a lot of money. And when we break that down, we see that, again, that represents a different level of revenue across different disease areas. When we look at respiratory specifically, we can see data, again, the adherence rate changes based on particular therapies and particular drugs, but around 30% adherence. And if we think about respiratory, it's mostly inhalation-based medication. People tend to take their medication when they have a tightness in their chest or they're not breathing well, as opposed to following the prophylactic-based prescription, which is around regular medication delivery. So we get low adherence rates. What does that mean? Well, for respiratory medicine in 2011, if we utilize that average adherence rate, it means that we know about $21 billion worth of drugs was actually sold. But that means $46 billion of revenue focused to pharma was left on the table. It wasn't collected. And if we break that, use those numbers to look at a specific drug, we would look at that and estimate that for Advair, that meant in the US in 2011, we know that $4.5 billion was actually generated in revenue. But those numbers would indicate or lead us to believe that about $10 billion was left on the table. And we see the same situation when we look at diabetes or autoimmune conditions like rheumatoid arthritis. The question is, what can we do to address that? Right? How can we better understand and influence patient behavior in the real world? This is the area that my team has been focused at, and we've been focused at in Philips Medisize for the past several years. Right? We need to figure out, how do we help and determine and impact behavior of patients in the real world when they're taking their medication. And that all starts at the medication event. So one of the areas that we're focusing on is changing the way that drug delivery devices are set up. Can we make devices that are easier, better, more useful for patients to help them take their medication effectively, but also be able to capture that event, right? To capture when people are actually taking their medication. We've been developing new injector technologies and new connectivity modules, very inexpensive, high volume modules that companies can integrate into their existing devices, where these tend to be more disposable based products. So things like inhalers, pen injectors, and auto injectors, where people use and dispose of them, we've been developing connectivity aids that allow connections to be integrated into those devices, all with the purpose of understanding real world patient behavior. And if we can capture that information, we can pass that information using Bluetooth technology to mobile phones, to smart devices. We know that these proliferate now at a global level, and people use this to help them do all sorts of different things. We want to harness this power to be able to support in one of the most important activities globally, which is improving people's health. When you develop an app in this area, it's generally viewed as software as a medical device. What we're doing is not only capturing the information, but providing aid and support to patients to be able to help them understand how they're taking their medication, and ideally improve that or support them when some event's occurring that's causing them to stop doing that in the most appropriate fashion. If we capture that information, we're of course able to pass that using the cellular network to a fully integrated, sustainable data management solution in a cloud-based environment. We've built our own connected health platform as a data management solution where we're capturing and holding this data. We've built it, I won't go into details about this, but it's a single system where we can deploy globally using a core technology from a company called InterSystems, which is already servicing about 100 million patients globally in over 100 countries, and very much integrated at the data level. We've built our application layer on top of that to support medical adherence, and we host that in AWS as our partner for that. When we capture that data, we're able to do great things with that. So from a healthcare professional point of view, we're able to utilize that data to show and display to healthcare professionals what patients are doing with their medication. We can also support pharmaceutical companies globally by using that as a way of understanding their sales rollout, how they're working with their doctors, and individual patient behavior if they're deploying patient support programs. So we're able to look at individual patient level data. That's for healthcare professionals, and then anonymized data for the pharmaceutical companies to help them work with their systems. So in capturing that, then, if we go and we take a look at some of the technology that we're developing at the device level today, we've been developing, particularly in the injection field, technologies that help people take their medication more effectively for injections. Combining a reusable electronic platform that is electrically powered to deliver device, but using standard 1 mil and 2.25 mil pre-filled syringes that are held in a custom cassette that provides full needle safety operation. And it provides a more sustainable operation for the environment, because for each use of a drug, you're throwing away less material. And you have to store and transport less when you're transporting the drug. It's highly intuitive to use for patients, very similar to current single-use disposable devices, and includes connectivity built into the device to be able to support our ecosystem around connected healthcare. When we go back and we think about, well, what does this mean when we're thinking about how do you build a business case if you're a pharmaceutical company to be able to support connectivity? So if we go back and remind ourselves of the condition in these 3 disease areas, we have data from 2011 sales. And through that, we're able to think about, well, if I try and add connectivity to these drugs, that's going to add cost to the pharmaceutical company to supply that they probably can't be reimbursed from. If we think that cost may be $5 for both the hardware piece and the software elements for that, it's a significant amount of money potentially to add. Now, we're trying to be very conservative in our estimate of this. We believe that the cost, we're driving down the cost to be lower than this. But just as we think about the business viability, what we end up with then is, as I said, significant cost potentially on an annual basis added to provide connectivity to, again, be able to understand the way patients are using our drugs in the real world. The question is, if I can use this technology to improve adherence, and that increases drug sales, what level of adherence improvement do I need in order to recover that cost and start to build up additional revenue and profitability? And the answers are very interesting. So with respiratory, that might be around 1% in the case of Advair. In the case of diabetes and Lantus, up about 3.5%. And in autoimmune diseases, maybe 1%. So what we were trying to show, we weren't trying to get exact figures when we did this analysis. We were trying to determine at a rough level, could we deploy these technologies and realistically improve adherence levels enough that we'd be able to demonstrate a strong business case for pharmaceutical companies to invest in this technology, claim more of the medication that they're able to deliver to the market, and easily recover that. And we believe that that is possible. The key is we've already done this. So we have examples where Philips Medisize has already implemented and delivered systems like this to the market that patients are using today. We worked with Bayer to develop a system for a drug that they developed, Betaseron. In that, we have a device, mobile app, a central database, and a portal that special nurses are able to view and support patients in the field. We're doing more systems like this for more companies. And the point is within this, where these are of interest to people, you can buy experience. Right? We're one of the few, if not the only company, to have actually implemented this as a combination drug device delivery system in the market. So I hope that you enjoyed the presentation. We're very happy to talk to anybody further if they've got interest in either our device solutions or our off-device connected health solutions. Ultimately, our focus is to make it easier and more convenient for patients to take their medication. Thank you.